All right. Thank you all for joining us today again. Just want to thank everyone that's on the call within this webinar for taking the time out of your busy day to join us for coffee and conversation. My name is Ken Davis, and I am the Director of Business Development for eTrepid here. I will help guide you on the journey to compliance. Now, I'm sure the changes regarding CMMC 2.0 has brought many questions. So I'll be sure to provide my contact information at the end of the webinar in case you want to get a hold of me or our guest speaker regarding the things you've learned or the things you hear here today. All right. Now, I'd like to take a moment to introduce you all to Tom Blanford, the CEO of eTrepid. Tom has a unique career path that resulted in the establishment of a company in the image of his service to this country. Now, as a US Navy veteran, Tom's military service and information technology background has led him to create and to become a premier award-winning global IT services provider. For those of you who are not familiar with eTrepid, our team focuses on areas of cybersecurity, cloud computing, AI, machine learning, as well as unified communication services. Now, eTrepid services are highly customizable and can be specifically developed to meet your business needs or your compliance concerns or requirements. We are located here in Mechanicsville, Maryland. And so I would say whatever your needs are, please do reach out to us. We can provide services nationwide. Today, we're excited to have Sean Duffy with Duffy Compliance Services joining us for a little coffee and conversation. Sean will help us take a deep dive into the CMMC 2.0 updates and modifications to gain some insights into where we are and where we need to be. He'll review the new and ongoing requirements that we need to consider, as well as any compliance and regulation that will help us better secure our business. Now, after the presentation, we'll address any questions you may have, and we'll do our best to provide you with answers that you may be looking for. Additionally, if you do remain until the end of this webinar, we will give you an opportunity to take advantage of a free 30-minute consultation that will help you determine what your next steps should be and how a vulnerability and risk assessment may help your business. Now, we will hold all questions and answers until after the presentation has concluded to give Sean the opportunity to provide all the information he has for us today. However, please do feel free to use the Q&A feature that is provided at the bottom of the screen to ask your questions, as well as leave any comments in the chat section. The eTrepid team is monitoring these sections and will provide you answers to your questions when we get to that portion of our conversation. Lastly, we have a number of people on today's virtual event and want to thank everyone for joining. If you are one of the first 100 people to register for this event, and if you remain through the entire event, you will receive a $10 Starbucks gift card on behalf of eTrepid. Enjoy a cup of coffee on us. Now, after the event today, our team will follow up with you to ensure that we have all the information needed so that you can receive your card. For now, I'm happy to host our midday pick-me-up, so grab a cup of coffee and let's get started. We're delighted to have Sean Duffy, who is the CEO at Duffy Compliance Services. He is a cybersecurity consultant and analyst whose understanding of system threats and federal security controls makes him an asset to any security project. In his tenure, Sean has earned dozens of certifications on administering and configuring OEM security products. Now, he has earned several certifications with some of the most respected industry leaders, such as Cisco, Intel, EC Council, SANS Global Information Assurance Certification, and CompTIA. The floor is all yours, Sean.
Hey, hi, everybody, and thanks for joining the call today. Thanks to Ken for that nice introduction. We were going to talk about some other things that had to do with more of the controls, but I felt that the CMMC 2.0 was much more important. The release was just last week, so there's a lot of new things on here, but I think most of you are going to be happy about the new changes. And I wanted to make sure everybody was up to page on that. So with that, we'll get started. So a couple of the things, we'll talk about the model itself, what's changed there. We'll talk about some of the regulations that were impacted. We'll like to talk a little bit about some of the updates, some of the benefits that will happen as a result of 2.0 coming in. And I like to do a security control example so that you kind of understand that not everything is going to be implemented anymore. And it's important that we recognize that as we go through the new regulation. And then I'd like to have kind of review, mostly because there's just an enormous amount of information, and I want to make sure everybody has a takeaway with that. So with that, let's take a look at the new model. The old model is the 1.0 there on the left, and it had two sides to it. It had a process side, which was for documentation, and a practice side, which was for all the security controls. So the new version has consolidated that. So level 2 and level 4 are no longer going to be part of the solution. So right now, the framework only has 3 levels, where 1 is going to stay the same, and level 2 is basically the old level 3, and level 3 will now be level 5. Or I'm sorry, will be the other way around. So level 5 will now be level 3. So now there's just these 3 levels, and they only contain the practices. So the nice thing about this, too, is we still have the regulations for each of these different levels, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And I'll show you where they come from, so you'll be able to review those and help you, go through the process of generating your controls and your system security plan. Right. So the first things is the bullet points. It eliminates all the processes. So if you remember back when I showed you on level 1.0, we had processes and practices. The processes are the documentation piece. And CMMC 1.0 had a number of processes that were involved, and they've all been removed now to help them make that easier for you guys to get through the certification process. It also eliminated all of the old CMMC 1.0 security practices. So there were 20 controls that were involved with that, which for level 3 made it 130 controls that you needed to pass. So understand now, level 2 is mirroring 800, 171, or 110 controls versus the 120 that we had in the past. So this is good, right? We don't have to meet those additional controls. The expert level, which was level 5, and most of you probably won't be involved in this one, actually will be based on a new regulation that came out probably earlier this year, probably in Q1 or Q2, I'm not actually sure. But that's on the NIST 800-172, which is the requirements for sensitive but unclassified information, and that's where level 3 will be assessed. And I'll get into the assessment here in a second, but I just wanted you to understand these are some of the nice benefits in terms of the amount of controls and amount of processes that we have to meet. So far as the regulations go, the FAR regulation, which hopefully you all know this by now, was the basic safeguarding for covering CDIs and FDI information, which contractor information. This really goes around the 17 initial controls in level 1. That's not changing. There were no processes to begin with that acquisition regulation. So understand that level 1 will stay the same. The DFAR regulation will also stay the same, at least in 7012. And that was the what they called good level of cybersecurity. So, and it was for the CDI and also for CUI information. You have to meet that regulation to do DoD contracts and be able to actually work with CUI data. That's the minimum standard. That's the DFAR regulation. You can look it up. There are a couple of other ones that were revolved around the CMMC in DFARs, which were 7019 and 7020, which dealt with the supplier's performance risk system, or SPRS database. That is still a requirement. Just understand now that, you know, there are less things to meet in that. You still have the 800-171, which is the minimum that that you'll need to go through for the controls. But the good news is, right, there's nothing new added to that. These requirements may change because the level 1.0 has changed. So 7019 and 7020 are going to probably be part of that review to see if it's still required, because it is the interim rule and not because it's a final rule, and because CMMC 2.0 came out. So I just wanted you to know there are still regulations out there that still apply and still hold you accountable for CUI data. These are those. Some of the other nice things is CMM 2.0 also allows for plan of actions, or a POAM, as it's called. And this really comes around the values in the security requirements. And if you notice, we're actually moving away. Again, I'm not 100% sure because all of this could change. But right now, when we go through the interim rule, everything is based on the NIST 800-171 controls. And so that's why you see this as sorry about that. That's why you see it as 3.1 and 3.1 versus AC. I apologize, I don't know what's going on there. All right, and so that's why you see it as 3.11 and 3.12 versus, because that's from 800-171, whereas the controls for CMMC is AC.1.001 and so on. So the important thing to understand here, the plan of action is allowed now during your accreditation process. The fact that is that you can't have any of the higher values. So I put this screen up to show you that some of these controls have more weight to them or value, and those will have to be met. So you won't be able to use, you know, like the values of 5 and say, okay, that's going on my POAM. You'll have to go through your assessment having all of those higher values met. The lower ones, like the 1s and possibly the 2s, you can get away with as part of your POAM. Now, the POAM basically says, I haven't got all of my controls in place yet. However, I have a plan of action to get those controls met. And that's what this is about. This is only a snippet. The rest of this, we also want to dedicate to a person and a timeline, right? So if I knew I was trying to meet 3.1.1, for example, I would assign it to, you know, an actual person and give them a timeline to actually create that or resolve that missing requirement. Okay. And I'm sure there may be questions on that, and hopefully we'll address those at the end of this presentation. The other nice thing is CMMC 2.0 provides for waivers. Now, not anybody can get a waiver, so don't feel like, oh, hey, great, I'm, you know, able to get out of this. But understand that they are allowing for waivers for very specific acquisitions, and it really deals with mission critical requirements. So if you're building something that is unique and it is something that you're struggling to get through the CMMC process, and it's something that the government can't live without, they will give you a waiver for a very limited time, just to get you through the hump so that, you know, the DoD doesn't suffer as a result of you not meeting this requirement. Now, don't feel like anybody can go out and get this. It is a waiver for the entire CMMC certification, not just a specific practice. So if you're missing something, you can't go back and go, I need a waiver for that. That's not what this is about, right? This is for somebody that really has a mission critical instance, and they have to get through this process for some other reason they weren't able to complete it. You'll need senior leadership approval, obviously, on it, and the DoD must have a justification package. So there's a couple of things in here also. Do understand, though, even if you were able to get a waiver, it won't last. It is just to get through a hurdle is really what this was designed around. Okay, so CMMC 1.0 had domains. And if we go back to the families in CMMC 2.0, hopefully they'll change the nomenclature, but if not, just understand that we had 17 domains here, And with 2.0, we're going to remove 3 of those. Now, I'm not sure if we're going to go back to families, which is an 800.171, but understand that there's only 14 of those domains now that we have to deal with. And one of these I wanted to bring up, and one of the things that we do in my company is provide for risk assessment, risk management, and vulnerability and security assessments. So I had a whole thing on that earlier, but I figured I would use that as an example to show you that even though I have that domain I need to meet, I may not have to meet all the requirements within that domain. Again, because 2.0 is more in line with 800.171 than it is with the original CMMC 1.0. So if we take an example, and again, I'm going to use risk management because that's one of the areas that we happen to be an expert in. The CMMC new version, level 1, which is basic, it was also the level 1 for CMMC 1.0, requires no practices. So you don't have a risk management requirement in level 1 for either side. As we move to level 2, there are the 3.11, that's where it falls in with the 800.171 controls. It was also labeled in CMMC 1.0 as RM 2.141. That's where those came from, right? So we had to have a risk assessment, we had to scan for vulnerabilities, and we had to remediate those vulnerabilities in accordance with the risk assessments. So those are the 3 controls for level 2 that we'll need to meet in the new version. Interestingly enough, if we go to the level 3 in the old version, RM3.144, RM3.146, those don't have a correlation with 800.171. So they don't apply anymore. Remember I talked about those 20 controls that were going to be removed? Here's 3 of them. So I know that's a lot. I probably spoke really fast through all of that. So let me go and kind of give you one or 2 more things that will really help you out here. The level 1 is the foundational one. Obviously, it requires an annual self-assessment. So that's great. Now we don't have to go through the certification process. So this was really to alleviate small businesses that really weren't going to go through CUI data or have to protect CUI data, but they still want to protect the contract information, the FCI and the CDI information, which is contractors' defense information. Now we can get away with just doing a self-assessment. Advanced or level 2 has 2 different, so they split that into 2 different kind of acquisitions. One of them is called non-prioritized, and these are the non-mission critical components or acquisitions that the government would go through. And if they're not mission critical, you can continue to do the annual self-assessment. So again, just like level 1, you can self-assess. It doesn't require a C3PO. That is also to help you move things along. Level 2 in the prioritized or mission critical acquisitions will require this certification from a third party approving organization or C3PAO. And that assessment or that certification is good for 3 years. So again, every 3 years, you'll have to go through that assessment. That is where the C3PAOs will first get involved. In fact, it's the only place they'll get involved because level 3, the expert, also requires a 3-year assessment, but it's conducted by the government. So if you're doing level 5 in the old one, or if you're doing level 3 in the new version, understand that it won't be the C3PAOs that are involved with that one. So great news for contractors in the terms of doing self-assessments. Again, you probably want to get people involved with that. I know companies like eTrepid and ourselves can certainly help as consultants to make sure that your self-assessment is first accurate. There is a program out there or a act called the False Claims Act that the DOJ is currently using to make sure that people are being truthful in their self-assessment. So don't feel like, oh, great, I can just say whatever I want. If you get audited, or if your prime or your agency that you're working for decides that they need to check your evaluation, that could spell trouble for you if you don't have the proof. And so that proof comes from a system security plan and through standard operation procedures. Now, again, we went back to the original new version of 2.0 and know that the processes are gone or the documentation requirement is gone. But understand, if you're self-assessing, you better have some documentation to prove that the things that you're trying to meet are there. Otherwise, the DOJ might be visiting your door. So let's talk about all the things that I just spoke about. The CMMC 2.0 does reduce the requirements for your contractors, right? We don't have the process requirements. However, it's implied that you still have some way to enforce the controls that you're trying to meet. Understand that also you may not have the security policies, the security procedures, but you're going to need those proofs. You will still require, and this is part of the 800-171, a system security plan. Also know that you're going to need a plan of action. We'll get into that in just a second. I see that's a few bullets down. It also removes the 20 additional controls from the original CMMC 1.0 practices. So again, I showed the example with risk management. Those last 3 controls that were in level 3 no longer apply. So now I only have to do the ones in level 2, which are also in level 2 in CMMC 2.0. It allows for the self-assessments. We already talked about that. All of level 1 is now self-assessments, and most of level 2 will be self-assessments. And we'll do that probably through the SPRS arrangement. I'm not sure how they've come to that, how they're going to have you do your self-assessments, but right now, the DoD interim rule set aside the SPRS database, and that's where they're doing it currently right now. So if you haven't gotten in there and you need to go through the self-assessments, I highly recommend getting some help from an RP, RPO, even the C3PAOs to help make sure that you're not inadvertently misleading your assigned score. Also, we talked about the CMMC 2.0 now allows for plan of actions and waivers. We can't have any high scores on those controls in our plan of action, but we can have a plan of action and still go through the self-assessment and still be able to consider ourselves certified or compliant with the CMMC 2.0. The waivers are very special and limited situations, so just be aware, don't rely on that, but they do have it for those unique situations. And also I want to point out, this is brand new. It is going through rule change, which means it has to go through public review and it has to go through congressional review. So things could change. But remember, the DoD really wants to save their supply chain because 1.0 was definitely confusing. 2.0 has simplified the process for most of the federal contractors. So hopefully it'll get better. There still will be a lot of training that's involved, especially for C3PAOs to make sure that they're doing their job correctly. And for the RPs to make sure that they're providing, or in this case, certified practitioner, CPs, to make sure that they're helping you in the best way possible. Some other things are to review is the 800-171 document. So if you haven't seen it, you know that that's what it's going to be based on. CMMC 2.0 is going to be based on 800-171. So the processes aren't dictated in 171, but they're implied. So whereas, and anybody who's actually done classified environments would know that every policy or every domain, every family has the need for security policies and procedures. While they're not specifically in 800-171, be prepared that you may have to have proof for your SPRS entry, and that's done through procedures. 800-171 does require a system security plan, so don't feel like you're not going to have any documentation. You will have to have at least that one. The plan of action is a great way for us to say, hey, we may not be meeting all of our SSP, but we have a plan to get there. We can't have any high scores on our plan of action. So as you go through that checklist or that methodology scoring system for the SPRS, understand that there are different values on each of the controls, and all the high value ones have to be met. Talked about the waivers and the special case, special situations for that. The FAR acquisition regulation is still at the basic security practice, so that's not going to change. You still have those 17 controls. They're in that FAR regulation. They're also available on level 1 from CMMC 2.0. Now, the manual hasn't been released yet. We expect that to come out at the end of the month. But they do have a website that's available, and we can certainly, if you ask about it, I'll certainly present that during our Q&A. The DFARS, that's the DoD one. There are a couple of things we need to know about that. It is based on the 800-171. So if you remember back when I listed them out, the 7012, which was the highlighted one, that stands for the good security practice, and that's met through 800-171. So they match up, they go together. It's not going to change. CMMC 2.0 is reliant more on 800-171 than on the old CMMC 1.0. That's good. The FedRAMP Moderate is really a product. If you decide to go with a cloud-based solution, your cloud provider or your service provider, whoever you're using outside of your own environment, must be FedRAMP Moderate or equivalent. This is important for any solution that you utilize that's outside of your own environment. So keep that in mind. It's not a CMMC requirement. It is a DFARS requirement. Okay, that is all the updates that I have right now. I hope that was beneficial, and we will, I guess we'll take questions now.
All right. Well, Sean, thank you for being flexible with the information that you provided us today and ensuring that everyone is informed about these changes. We were scheduled to talk about CMMC, and of course, as we were preparing, the changes were dropped on us. So as anticipated, we do have some questions in the queue. So let's invite CEO Tom Blanford and Chief Information Security Officer Jim Garvin to provide answers, as well as our eTrepid team member Mehar. Remember, if you do have a question, please use the Q&A feature provided at the bottom of the screen to share, and we will try to answer your questions as best as possible. Mehar, what is the first question?
Hello, everyone. So the first question I have here is, how will my organization know what CMMC level is required for a contract?
Sean, I can take that one.
I figured you would.
Okay.
That's why I didn't say anything.
Sorry for the delay, folks. So CMMC, what you're going to want to do is look at your contract. If your contract has the DFARS clause in it, then that is going to dictate what level it is. If it has DFARS, then that's typically means that you're dealing with CUI. If it doesn't have the DFARS clause in it, then it's FCI or maturity level. Well, we're going to say level 1.
That's great too. A lot of times if people don't understand really what level they need to be, they can also ask, so not just from the contract itself, but the agencies or the supply chain that you're a part of, that prime may say, I need you to be level 3, or level 2. I'm getting it all mixed up already, right?
Right.
We're so used to saying level 3. But yeah, I may need you to be level 2, in which case they're dictating that for you. Hopefully they'll give you support, to help you meet that level that you need to.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sean. You definitely want to befriend that contracting officer that you're working with. They have
Absolutely.
the information. Yep.
All right. The next question I have here is, will prime contractors and subcontractors be required to maintain the same CMMC level?
That's a good question. That depends on if there's flow downs, if they're providing that data to the subcontractor or not. So if they are, then yes. If they're not, then no.
All right, we have a question in. How does a company determine whether they should follow level 2, non-prioritize acquisition or prioritize acquisition? Is it by contract?
Sean, I'll let you take that one.
That's a great question, right? That is part of the new CMMC 2.0, and it's really not defined yet. So most of the organizations are going to look at the non-prioritized, right? So if you had to guess, you're probably going to be in that side. The prioritized ones are really designed around mission critical. Remember, we talked about that waiver in the presentation. But there are several things that are kind of dictated about what prioritized is. The last thing the government wants to do is stymie their supply chain, right? So if they're coming at you and saying, oh, you know, I've got to get my mission critical system done, and this component is a requirement of that, like if it's in manufacturing, then it's a good chance you're going to need a prioritized acquisition. But for the most part, you know, if we're doing textiles, if we're doing, well, you know, things that are maintenance, that aren't prioritized, it's a good chance that it's just going to be on the self-assessment side. But we don't know,
Alrighty.
it's not defined yet. So just want to put that out there.
Okay. Next question we have here is, what is the difference between a CMMC self-assessment and a basic assessment required as part of the DoD assessment methodology?
You want me to take that one?
Yeah, sure.
So basic is the self-assessment, right? So the methodology in 800-171A actually dictates how we go through the process. The DFAR says that you have to go through there are 3 levels of accreditation that you can go through, and the majority of them will be on the basic level. So what you're seeing in basic under the DFAR regulation is a self-assessment. That self-assessment is done through a documentation from the DoD called the methodology, the assessment methodology. That document has all of the layers, and I think I showed that in the presentation, that had all of the different controls with their weights to them. A self-assessment or the basic level means I can do that on my own. I wouldn't recommend anybody who isn't in this industry to try to do that on their own, but obviously that's what the government is asking. If you want to give it a whirl, by all means, you know, you can get that documentation, you can download it, and it's freely available, and you can walk through those controls and just see how you do. The problem that you run into when we start doing that on our own is we don't want to be inaccurate. You know, the DOJ has that thing that they're using right now. It's, you know, they don't want to be able to hold anybody, you know, feet to the fire, but they also want you to be accountable, right? So as you go through that process, understand that basic says that you can do that. Moderate says that you should have a third party doing, and advanced is the government's doing it. So keep that in mind. Most of these will be at the basic level. If you want the definition for that, it's under NIST 800-171A or in the DoD assessment methodology form as well.
And Sean, aren't they're also requiring now with the CMMC that a senior person is going to have to sign off on that annual assessment as well. So that's a huge difference as well.
Yeah, right. Well, they didn't have self-assessments before, right?
Right.
So, but now they have to say, I got to hold someone's feet to the fire. And
Right.
so you're absolutely right. You have to have senior, you know, it can't be the tech guy, you know, your staff member saying, oh yeah, this is where we are, and everybody's okay with that. It's just like, I don't know if, you know, anybody's been through the finance one, but the Sarbanes-Oxley really held, you know, the CEOs and the executives accountable. This is going to be kind of the same thing. They're going to be held accountable. So good point.
Okay, so the next question I have here is, what is the relationship between National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, Special Publication 800-171, and CMMC?
Well, that's another good question, easy one. So Sean actually did present that in earlier in the slide. CMMC is heavily based on NIST 800-171 version 1. And now with the version 2, it's really aligned with NIST 800-171.
Yeah, so I understand the 800-171 has been out for about 5 years now. That's been the established mark for other agencies, especially for like NASA, and they had these requirements in the past. The DoD is what really drove CMMC. They didn't have it up until about 2 years ago, and the DoD said, "Look, I need to protect my supply chain. I have the CUI data that I am sharing. It's escaping, and we're trying to stymie that." And so the idea was, let's create an environment, a certification process that says, hey, I need to know that my supply chain is doing their due diligence to protect this data. And that's where CMMC came from. But it really, the DFARS 7012, that original one that I mentioned, that was based on 800-171 from the very beginning. CMMC came after that.
All right, next question. Are there any hints as to how CMMC will integrate with other sets of standards?
That's a to be determined, right, Sean? I mean, it's changing.
Absolutely. We don't
Yeah.
know yet, right?
Right.
There's a lot of pieces that are involved with this. I would imagine they don't want to reinvent the wheel. So as you know, this matures, I could see it, you know, maybe resembling a little bit like ISO, or maybe, you know, kind of integrating with the cybersecurity framework or the risk management framework. But ultimately, this is a framework, and understand that as a framework, it's a methodology. It's a way to do business. How that changes and grows is really, you know, going to be dictated on how effective it is now and how they can make it more effective in the future.
Okay, last question I have here. If I got my assessment prior to the CMMC 2.0 change, which now covers NIST 800-171, but my perm requested CMMC L3, would those prior assessments be sufficient now that not that there is a change for only 800-171?
So if you did it on 1.0, I have to assume that you went through the process on 171, I'm sorry, in CMMC 1.0. Well, first of all, the assessment component, you know, had to have been a self-assessment because there is no certification right now for CMMC. That's what they're trying to fix, right? 2.0 is to help alleviate having C3PAOs come in and do third-party assessments for all the supply chain. So if you've gone through that process, understand this, right? For 1.0, you met an additional 20 controls that were not required for 2.0. You also met all those processes, so you have all of your documentation as proof that you're meeting the controls. So I would say thumbs up, you're in good shape. If you've gone through the methodology, you know what your score system is. If it's below 110, that's great news in the fact that you can create a POAM and still go through the process. So, Jim, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. So as Sean said, you could go through the assessment, but you really couldn't get certified. They hadn't had the actual certification out to the general public yet. So there was really no way to actually get certified. They had some provisional assessors, but they were still developing the training programs for all the assessors, and that got really kind of put on hold as soon as version 2.0 came out. So if you've assessed it, that's kudos to you. If you feel that you've done the assessment, that's great news. And then now, as Sean said, with 2.0, you can actually do the self-assessment and just you know, in the back of your mind, make sure you're aware of that False Claims Act. You don't want to, if there's something that you're not sure of, POAM. You know, that would be my recommendation.
Or reach out to your RPOs.
Right.
Well, we had lots of great questions there. Thank you, Mehar. Thank you, Jim. And Sean, once again, really, thank you for adding to our coffee and conversation by taking the time to share this important information with everyone today. So thanks for the Q&A. Now, in the chat section, we've placed a link to sign up and take advantage of a free 30-minute consultation to examine your cyber posture and provide personalized insights into what your business may need to incorporate CMMC requirements, as well as to discuss how a vulnerability and risk assessment review can strengthen your security efforts and posture. Now, again, the link has been provided in the chat, so simply fill out the form, and we'll be sure to follow up with you to provide additional information and answer any questions that you may have. You must sign up by December 10th to take advantage of this exclusive offer. If you have general questions about services or want to learn more about CMMC or our offer for you today, please feel free to contact me. My information is listed on the screen. In the meantime, we'll send you a survey, and we would love to hear what your thoughts are about the information received today, as well as how we can better prepare you for your cyber journey. Lastly, be sure to join us for our next coffee and conversation as we discuss the effect of COVID on compliance. This is on Thursday, January the 20th at 11 a.m. The compliance group will provide insights on how the vaccine mandate can have an impact on your compliance policies and add to your requirements. Now, keep an eye out for more information about the event, and we will be releasing some information soon regarding that. Also, feel free to follow us on social media if you have an interest in getting updated industry information or join our news blast list. You can check us out at eTrepid.com or search for @eTrepid on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, and Pinterest. Thank you for joining us. Have a great week, and we hope to see you again next time.